It's business as usual at this Yangon market. If it wasn't for the heavy police presence and barricades, it'd be hard to tell that Myanmar is in a state of emergency. The military seized power on Monday. Residents already struggling with the economic impact from the coronavirus pandemic are concerned that the situation is only going to get worse.
I haven't had a single taxi passenger today despite the fact that I have been on the shift since 4 a.m. I have had steady earnings throughout the pandemic, but now, with the political changes, I am afraid it will be difficult to make enough money to feed my family.
People are frustrated with the coup. They're worried about what it means for their future. We want to know how exactly we'll be protected by the new government.
The coup comes after the military refused to accept the results of November's parliamentary elections, alleging fraud. At the time, Aung San Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy declared a landslide victory over the army-backed opposition. Now, Suu Kyi and hundreds of government officials have been placed under house arrest. The U.S., along with the U.K. and the EU, have condemned the coup and called for the release of all detainees. Washington has warned that it may reimpose sanctions on Myanmar.
We removed sanctions, the United States, I should say, removed sanctions on Burma over the past decade based on progress toward democracy. The reversal of that progress will necessitate an immediate review of our sanctions laws and authorities, followed by appropriate action.
The United Nations is also concerned about Myanmar's minority Rohingya population. Since a military crackdown in 2017, nearly 1 million Rohingya Muslims have fled the country, most of them to Bangladesh, where they are still living in overcrowded refugee camps.
There are about 600,000 Rohingyas that remain in Rakhine State, including 120,000 people who are effectively confined to camps. They cannot move freely and have extremely limited access to basic health and educational services. So our fear is that the events may make the situation worse for them.
On the quiet streets, there's a sense of unease and the realization that after a long struggle for democracy, the military has once again taken charge in Myanmar. Natasha Hussain, TRT World.
For more on this, Vasuki Shastry joins us now from Dubai. He's an Associate Fellow of the Asia-Pacific Program at Chatham House. Welcome back to the program, Vasuki. Now, as we heard there, the US has removed sanctions on Myanmar over the last decade or so. We know Joe Biden wants to reintroduce them potentially if the situation doesn't change in the country. What options does Joe Biden have in terms of sanctions?
In many ways, this is the first geopolitical test, both for President Biden, who's just been in office for 2 weeks, as well as for China. And, the China-US relationship has been a very rancorous one, full of tensions, mainly centered on trade. And I'm sure Beijing is waiting to see what kind of actions the US is actually going to introduce. They've said they're going to place the entire economic relationship with Myanmar under review. And how long this review is going to take is anybody's guess. And so the critical thing here really is one of calibration. This is a test case of whether the US and China and other world powers can take a unified position in really agreeing to restoration of democratic rule in Myanmar, equally critical, trying to bring a resolution to the Rohingya issue. So this is a great opportunity, I think, for the international community, both to show solidarity as well as global cooperation, which has been missing for the last 4 years. So we'll wait and see if these sanctions threat are really going to be put into place, or is there going to be a resolution among the great powers to help bring about a peaceful settlement in Myanmar.
We know Myanmar still is one of the poorest countries in Southeast Asia. Can you describe to us what impact sanctions had on the country when they were in place?
Well, there's a mixed view of how the sanctions impacted the country in the past. So we've got to remember that Myanmar is not Iran. As a very large oil exporter, Iran is dependent on the US dollar because, oil trading is completely denominated in dollars. Now, Myanmar is not a dollar-denominated economy. It mainly trades with its neighbors, that was India, with China, with Thailand, and with other countries in Southeast Asia. It is heavily minerals and metals dependent economy, exports a lot of this to China and other countries. So it is less, it'll be less effective to implement the kind of sweeping sanctions that the US put into place, for example, in Iran during the Obama administration. One also has to remember that Myanmar is a desperately poor country, one of the poorest countries in Southeast Asia. And ironically enough, it's currently in a $700 million IMF program where the state councilor Aung San Suu Kyi, who's currently under detention, had promised sweeping economic reforms in exchange for receiving IMF assistance. And, casting a shadow over all of this is COVID-19, which is really impacting lives and livelihoods in Myanmar. So, the economic situation is pretty dire. And I think the international community should consider any sanctions that are introduced to ensure, for example, that medical supplies are not covered under these sanctions, and to make sure that, any assistance still flows through to help the poor.
Now, we know previously Myanmar's military rulers had refused to open up the country to a democracy for many years, despite the unrelenting sanctions that were imposed on them. So would it appear unlikely that they will cooperate with the US and demands from other countries in a return to democracy?
Yes, it's very, very difficult to understand what the strategy is of the Myanmar army in, undertaking this coup, in saying that there will be a one-year state of emergency after which new elections will be held. We still don't know under what terms, conditions those elections will be held, and indeed whether the NLD and Aung San Suu Kyi will be able to fully participate in that democratic process. So you're absolutely right in noting that in the past, Myanmar has taken the view that it can shut itself from the rest of the world and have the army essentially have its way in running the country. But I would argue that the last 10 years have been dramatically different. And I think the democratic process has been a near miracle in Myanmar. And I think ordinary Myanmarese now really understand the value of freedom, the value of having democracy, the value of economic freedom. So you're seeing millions of new businesses flourish under democracy. And all of this is going to be in peril. And I think the fact that you are beginning to see some sporadic protests in Yangon, one should not read too much into this. It's very early days, really shows that people are committed to the democratic process. So, one can take some solace in that.
Okay, Vasuki Shastry, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you again for joining us from Dubai.